I want to show you a document. It is dated December the 24th, 1992, Christmas Eve. It is on an official Watchtower letterhead. The recipient's name has been redacted. It is addressed simply to Dear Brothers. And what follows is one of the most damning documents I have ever read from this organization. And I want to tell you something before I read it to you. This letter was originally archived on a religious accountability website called FaithLeaks, a platform that collected and published internal documents from high control religious organizations operating in a similar model to WikiLeaks. It was publicly accessible for years. Researchers cited it, ex-JW communities discussed it. It was independently verified. And then the Watchtower sued FaithLeaks for copyright infringement. Truth and Transparency Foundation, the nonprofit behind FaithLeaks, announced their fundraising efforts came up short and they were forced to settle. The archive came down. The link went dead. The copy you are looking at on the screen right now is the copy I have and many others still have. Here's what it says. A body of elders in Florida wrote to Watchtower headquarters with a problem. A baptized, dedicated brother in their congregation had confessed to them that he had committed several unalivings and crimes before his baptism. Florida law enforcement had no knowledge of this. The elders asked headquarters one direct question. Does Florida law obligate some action on our part? And what I will show you next is the Watchtower's written, signed official response. Let me take you through this letter paragraph by paragraph, because every line of it reveals something important about how this organization thinks and what it actually prioritizes when no one outside is watching. The letter opens by acknowledging receipt of the elders' letter of December the 17th. That means headquarters turned this around in 1 week, 7 days, to issue formal written guidance on a case involving a confessed multiple unaliver in their congregation. And I want to make it clear that I am using the word unaliver instead of the appropriate correct terminology because I'm avoiding being flagged by YouTube's community guidelines on this video. The reference line at the top describes the situation as situation involving a brother who has been guilty of serious violations of the law in the past. The second paragraph is the heart of this letter, and I'm going to read it to you exactly as it appears on the page. You explained that you have received information indicating that this brother committed several unalivings and crimes before his baptism. You ask if Florida law obligates some action on our part. Florida law enforcement authorities have no knowledge of this matter. That last sentence, Florida law enforcement authorities have no knowledge of this matter. The elders are explicitly telling Brooklyn, the police do not know. We are the only people who know. What do we do? And Brooklyn's answer is in the very next paragraph. As elders, you have no obligation to reveal information of this type to the authorities. Any information that you have obtained while fulfilling your duties as elders is strictly confidential. What he does about paying his debt to society is largely up to him and his conscience. Since he is apparently a fugitive from the law, he obviously would not qualify for any extra privileges of service in the congregation. And I want to dwell on that final sentence because it tells you precisely what this organization actually cares about in this situation. Not whether victims' families have ever received answers, not whether justice has been served, not whether this man poses a risk to anyone around him. The only practical consequence the letter identifies is that he cannot hold extra privileges of service, meaning he cannot be appointed as an elder or ministerial servant. That is the operational concern, internal congregation administration, not justice. Now, here's the paragraph that follows, and this is the one that every time I read it stops me completely. You state that you have one report of his smoking marijuana with his co-workers, which may have been after his baptism. We assume that this is the reason that you feel a need to meet with him, since he is a dedicated brother and he is presently attending the meetings. There is a need to investigate to determine if some type of congregation action is necessary. Likely the best approach is to arrange for two elders to talk to him informally to make some discreet inquiries about his current conduct. If there appears to be substantial evidence of serious wrongdoing, then a committee should be formed to hear the case. Read those two paragraphs back to back. The unalivings, no investigation required, no committee, 2 sentences and the matter is closed. The marijuana, allegedly smoked possibly after his baptism by an adult with his co-workers, requires 2 elders to make discreet inquiries and a possible judicial committee. This is not my editorializing. That is the sequence of the letter on official Watchtower letterhead. In their own words, the final substantive paragraph is the one I want you to read most carefully. As we believe you understand, it is imperative that the elders maintain strict confidentiality about his past. If the elders inadvertently reveal his past wrongdoing, it will undoubtedly result in major repercussions to him and his wife. So handling this case calls for good judgment and discernment. Major repercussions to him and his wife. Not justice for the victims, not truth for the families of the deceased. The stated concern, in the organization's own words, is the repercussions that disclosure could create for the confessed murderer and his spouse. The letter closes with the normal. We pray Jehovah's direction as you endeavor to fulfill your weighty responsibilities as shepherds of the flock. We send our warm Christian love. Warm Christian love on a letter instructing elders to keep a confessed multiple unalivers crimes permanently secret from the people whose job it is to investigate them. And I want to spend a few minutes being completely transparent with you about this document, because you deserve to know exactly what I can verify, how I obtained it, and what the Watchtower did when this letter became publicly known. This letter has circulated among researchers and former members who study the Watchtower's internal communications for a number of years. It was publicly archived on FaithLeaks. It was cited, discussed, and independently described across multiple ex-JW research communities, all referencing the same content, the same date, the same Florida context, and the same core finding. And then the Watchtower sued. In 2020, Watchtower Bible and Tract Society filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against Truth and Transparency Foundation, the nonprofit running FaithLeaks, alleging they had published 74 copyrighted convention videos without permission. Truth and Transparency Foundation announced they were forced to settle after their fundraising came up short. The FaithLeaks archive came down. Hundreds of documents, including the link to this letter, became inaccessible through that platform. Now, I want to be precise about something legally important here. The lawsuit was specifically about 74 copyrighted convention videos, creative works to which the Watchtower holds explicit copyright. This letter is a different category of document entirely. It is an internal administrative communication, a letter from a service department to a body of elders. Internal correspondence of this nature does not typically carry the same copyright protection as a published creative work. The removal of the FaithLeaks archive caught this letter in its wake, but the legal basis for suppressing this specific document is far weaker than the basis for suppressing published Watchtower videos. The copy you are seeing is the copy I have. I'm showing it to you directly on the screen in full, and it's still on the internet. Its existence has been independently corroborated by multiple sources that are still publicly accessible. I want to say something directly about that, about what the Watchtower did here. This organization used copyright law, a legal mechanism designed to protect creative expression, to pursue a whistleblower archive that was hosting evidence of their own conduct. The FaithLeaks link to this letter is now dead, but the document is not gone. Now, I want to show you why this letter is not an isolated incident. I want to show you that this letter represents a documented, decades-long institutional operating principle. This case is the most extreme documented example, but the mechanism behind it, confidentiality above reporting, internal discipline above external accountability, is the same mechanism that has been exposed again and again in cases that did reach the public record. In 1989, the Watchtower sent a memo to elders across the United States, stressing the importance of secrecy in matters disclosed to elders, stating that often the peace, unity, and the spiritual well-being of the congregation are at stake, and that improper use of the tongue by an elder can result in serious legal problems for the individual, the congregation, and even the society. The 1989 memo frames elder confidentiality explicitly as legal protection for the organization, not spiritual guidance. Legal protection. In March 1997, the Watchtower sent a directive to congregations instructing elders to compile detailed reports on any member accused of CSA and send them to headquarters in a specially marked blue envelope. Those reports built a searchable internal database, a database that has existed for decades, a database that was never voluntarily shared with law enforcement in any jurisdiction. In San Diego, Gonzalo Campos essayed at least 7 children in Jehovah's Witness congregations through the 80s and 90s. Congregation elders testified under oath that Watchtower leaders knew, and instead of reporting him to law enforcement, the organization promoted him to the position of elder. One of his victims, Jose Lopez, was 7 years old when the abuse began. When attorney Erwin Zalkin sued on Lopez's behalf and a court ordered the Watchtower to produce its internal abuse files, the organization sent only 4 years of records instead of the 19 years the court had ordered, and redacted the names of perpetrators and the congregations involved. A judge fined them $4,000 a day until they complied. They appealed rather than hand over the documents. The Australian Royal Commission examined Jehovah's Witness records dating back to the 1950s. The organization submitted documentation covering 1,006 separate abuse allegations against its own members in Australia. The Commission found no evidence that the Jehovah's Witnesses had notified authorities about a single one of those cases. Not one. In 70 years. Attorney Erwin Zalkin, who has represented numerous victims of abuse within Jehovah's Witness congregations, said it plainly to investigative journalists. They do everything to protect the reputation of the organization over the safety of children. Replace the word children with the word victims, and that sentence describes the 1992 Florida letter just as precisely as it describes every CSA case that followed it. This is not a child protection specific failure. It is a general operating principle applied consistently across the most serious categories of human harm. The organization's name, unity, and internal legal exposure come first. Everything else, justice, safety, truth, the families of the deceased, comes after. The 1992 letter is the most explicit documentation of that principle I have ever seen, but it is not an exception to the rule. It is the rule. I want to explain why this keeps happening. The Jehovah's Witness elder structure treats anything disclosed to an elder in a spiritual capacity as strictly confidential, similar to, in concept, to clergy penitent privilege in mainstream denominations, but applied far more broadly and far more absolutely. The elders trained instinct, built through years of organizational literature, and the shepherd the flock manual that governs elder conduct, is to treat disclosed wrongdoing as a matter for internal spiritual discipline, not external legal consequence. The shepherd the flock manual, that confidential handbook governing how elders operate, which is inaccessible to ordinary congregation members, directs elders to contact Watchtower's legal department upon learning of serious allegations. Not law enforcement, not child protective services, not a detective, a team of lawyers whose institutional purpose is to protect the organization's legal exposure. Now think carefully about what that single structural choice produces. It means that the very first call an elder makes upon learning that a member has confessed to unaliving or CSA or any serious crime goes to lawyers. The lawyers then determine what the elders are permitted to do, what must remain confidential, and what, if anything, gets escalated further. In the Florida case, that process produced a written response instructing the elders that they had no obligation to report the crimes. The system did not malfunction. It functioned exactly as it is built. And this is the point I want you to carry from this episode. The structural logic that produced the 1992 letter is identical to the structural logic that produced the Blue Envelope database, the Campos case, the 1006 Australian cases, and every documented instance of this organization choosing internal containment over external accountability. The crimes differ in severity. The structure producing the response is the same every time. And I want to return to something I mentioned at the beginning because I think it deserves more attention than a footnote. The Watchtower sued Faith Leaks. They used copyright law, a legal mechanism designed to protect creative expression, to protect artists and writers and filmmakers from having their work stolen, to pursue a whistleblower archive that was making their internal documents available to the public. Faith Leaks settled. The archive came down. Now, the lawsuit was technically about convention videos, creative works the organization had produced and to which they held legitimate copyright. That is a real legal distinction. But I want you to think about the effect of that lawsuit in the context of this letter. Before the Faith Leaks archive came down, anyone could search the platform and find the letter. Former members shared it. It was publicly accessible, independently verifiable. After the Faith Leaks archive came down, that specific link became a dead URL. A dead URL that the organization and individuals with something to hide understand creates friction that stops casual researchers, friction that makes it harder for journalists to verify quickly, friction that means the document reaches fewer people. The Watchtower did not sue Faith Leaks because of this letter, but the effect of the settlement applied broadly was to make the letter harder to find. And here's what I want to say about that directly. Copyright law was not designed to protect organizations from accountability for their own internal administrative decisions. It was not designed to give institutions the legal mechanism to pursue archives that host evidence of institutional conduct. The fact that the Watchtower was able to use it for that purpose, regardless of the technical legal basis of the specific claims, is itself a story about institutional power and the tools available to organizations with significant legal resources. The organization's attempt to make documents like this harder to access is documented and public, and the combination of these two facts, the letter's content and the effort to suppress it, tells you more about this organization's relationship with accountability than either fact does alone. They wrote the letter, and then they tried to bury the archive that housed it. I do not know what happened to the man in this letter. I do not know if he was ever caught. I do not know if there are families somewhere in Florida or wherever his crimes occurred, who have spent decades with unanswered questions about someone they lost. While the only people who knew the truth sat in a kingdom hall meetings alongside him, prayed with him, and were instructed by their own headquarters in writings to say nothing. That is the cost of this letter, not an abstraction, a real possibility that real families never got answers because an organization decided that strict confidentiality and the avoidance of repercussions to a confessed unaliver and his wife mattered more than the truth. This letter is 34 years old. The structural logic that produced it is not. The 1989 secrecy memo, the blue envelope database, the Campos case, the 1006 Australian cases, the Japan lawsuit, the Norway proceedings, the Faith Leak settlement, these are not separate scandals. They are the same institutional decision made over and over across decades, that the organization's protection comes before the accountability that victims of abuse, of every serious harm committed under its confidentiality umbrella, are owed. If you have information about historical or ongoing cases of this kind, the appropriate channels are law enforcement, child protective services in your jurisdiction, or organizations like Silent Lambs and SNAP, the survivors network of those abused by priests, which has expanded its work to include other religious institutions. This is not a problem that gets solved by outrage alone. It gets solved by people with direct knowledge, refusing to stay silent the way this letter demanded. Subscribe if you haven't already, share this video, and I'll see you next time.